I'm Dr. Chad Miller. I'm an associate professor in the Horticulture and Natural Resources Department.
And I'm Leslie Wren. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture and Regional and Community Planning. And we both teach plant ID classes here at K-State.
Yes, I teach 2 different ID courses, one in the fall, one in the spring.
And I teach one in the fall for our landscape architecture students.
And so today we thought we'd have a little conversation about plant naming, nomenclature, and more specifically focusing on the Latin names.
Botanical Latin.
Botanical Latin, yeah. So kind of give our experiences and our takes and ideas on how you can be successful in learning the plant names.
A lot of students have a hard time with their first plant ID classes because of the Latin, either because they're intimidated with it or just because it's challenging. What did you find when you were first taking your plant classes that was a challenge or a help?
It's a great question, Leslie. So going back several years, thinking of my first class, which was Woody Plants 1. Of course, being fairly fresh in horticulture and not ever really thinking about the naming before. Because I mostly went through the catalogs and the nursery sites. Well, there wasn't so much internet site back then. But I didn't really pay attention to the Latin names, so it was all Greek to me, if you will. By the way, there are some Latinized names that I take on the Greek pronunciation, so I was right there with it. In a nutshell, right, I'm off in the weeds here. It was challenging. It was definitely, we almost are in the weeds, I guess. So, wow, I'm just right on a roll here.
The jokes don't stop when you learn plants.
They don't.
If you haven't found out already, you'll find out soon.
Just stop by my class. People make... I'm surprised they don't bring eggs and tomatoes to my class, right? Like Persicum esculentum and, I don't know what eggs are, but something. Anyways, it was a challenge. It was a challenge learning the names the first time, because some of them are, multiple letters long, 12, 15, and you try to string that together, and really it's just like a mouthful of marbles at some of them. And some of them are very short and succinct, and it was easier. And so, with anything new, right? If you're swinging the bat for the first time, or the golf club, or using a paintbrush for the first time, it isn't easy. You just have to practice, right?
Mm-hmm. I didn't start taking plants classes until I was in grad school. But before that in my life, I had been involved in choir and biology and had learned different Latin names for songs or terms in biology before that. And learning plantsman's Latin threw me for a loop. And at first I thought, everybody's pronouncing this wrong. This isn't how you pronounce Latin. It's A-E-I-O-U. Nope. I had to get over myself and learn that this was the version of Latin that was spoken by this collection of professionals who are connected to the plant industry. And once I understood that, oh no, this is the language of the professionals, then it started getting fun learning this new way of speaking Latin.
Yep. I didn't sing. You don't want me to sing in front of this camera right now either, so I'd never had that previous experience. My other language was Spanish going into college, and so Latin, it's a whole new language. It's a dead language, which is why we tend to use it, why we do use it for plant naming, because it doesn't change. And so once it's set, it's set. We don't have any modifications.
Something that plant students often struggle with is, feeling like they have to nail it the right way. And I'm wondering, how do you approach that in your class? Like the right way? The right way.
So I know I pronounce some of them a little off kilter. That is not the right way. And so my approach in the class is I will have a slide and show the phonetic spelling, and then I will say it out loud and then have the class repeat it. And so it gets to be a challenge when you have 25 to 30 students and they all, for maybe the first time, are repeating Acer Nagundo, and it sounds like a big bubblegum mouthful of sound coming out. And so I ask them to repeat it, I give them phonetic spelling, and then I also direct them to other resources. One of the great resources out there, obviously, is the web, and then Missouri Botanic Garden. And they have a plant finder search, and Missouri Botanic Garden is one of the foremost plant authorities in the U.S., and they have plant taxonomists and plant biologists and horticulturists there, and so you can find plant names, and then they will give you a pronunciation, and so then you can hear a very correct, most appropriate pronunciation. So just keep pronouncing it as close to correct as possible. But I also, because I grade on spelling and the actual, I don't do verbal quizzes, but the spelling of it, sometimes the spelling doesn't necessarily follow the exact pronunciation. So I encourage students to pronounce it how it will help them to learn how to spell the name, because that's also important, especially when you start communicating with other professionals, and you just want to spell things right? So give them the name, have them say it at least once in my presence, and then encourage them to keep practicing and also seek out the other resources. So that's what I tend to do with the students.
And there's kind of phases that you go through in your life as a plants person. You know, the first phase is kind of marked with, how can I pronounce it so that I can remember how to spell it?
Yep.
Because, you know, the most important thing at the beginning is your grades, most likely, and not communication with other professionals.
Yep.
And then as you move further in school or your career, then it moves into communication and just being able to speak to somebody you may be talking to in the plant industry or send emails. Yep. And so it kind of evolves, and then you start getting exposed to more people who maybe have a slightly alternate pronunciation, which you have to accept too, because that is part of plant Latin, that multiple pronunciations are acceptable, so long as you can clearly communicate what plant it is you're talking about.
So I would say the vast majority of professionals you will run into have never had formal Latin pronunciation or Latin courses, right? So it's a matter of, between us as teachers, it's sort of that this pronunciation was passed on to me, it passed on to you, and so throughout the time there can be these slight modifications, right? And so, yeah, you will definitely find a couple different ways to pronounce many of them. And I think the other thing is, after you start to work with them, yes, as Leslie mentioned, early on getting the grade, but then you're more comfortable when you come across this in the literature or in the catalog or in a purchasing a catalog for, you can recognize that schizocheiria. And it triggers that thought of, like, I would venture a guess most students say it in their head, maybe not out loud, but it takes you down that path of at least saying it in your head and pronouncing it. So, and I probably speak for you, it's always a work in progress. I keep finding new plants that I've never heard or seen before, whether it's through literature or, through travels, and I have to walk through it, like, how is that really pronounced, sort of a thing, and sometimes even have to look it up and have it said to me. So we're still learning at the same time.
Yeah.
So I will say, I'll add this part. The good news, and I tell my students this, within each of our classes, there's a very, very, very small subset of plants. And from your vantage point, it looks like a very, very large subset of plants, especially if you haven't really dealt with a lot of plants before. But within, in the angiosperms, upwards of 65,000 different angiosperms, just angiosperms alone, you can think of the amount of plants. And you start looking around us here, and it's a very, very small group of plants. And even with that, you think of your maples and your oaks, then you're looking at just a few different species within. So it starts to narrow down. You're really looking at a few of the great magnitude of plants that are out there. So if that's helpful, you're just touching the tip of the iceberg with a lot of these.
So TLDR, stop whining. It's not so bad.
Yeah, TLDR, stop whining. It's not that bad. Just say it. So we just talked about naming and pronunciation and things like that. So as we look at the naming, there's some of them just start to roll off your tongue, and you can develop these favorites. So Leslie, do you have a favorite plant or two, based on the pronunciation of Latin?
Yes. So I have two that I will talk about, and one of them is dear to my heart because it reminds me of when I was going through school as a landscape architecture student. One of the plants that came up in our plants class was dawn redwood, which is Metasequoia glyptostroboides. And one of my classmates was from Jersey, and not only was his mind blown by this plant name, but he also he decided to own it, to learn it. And his way of owning it was to turn it into like a provocation or threat. So, he would just be walking around, you'd walk past him on your way to your desk, and he'd be like, "What do you mean, Metasequoia glyptostroboides?"
Wow.
And, of course, that made us laugh, and we wanted to say it more and say it right.
Right.
And then it became kind of the rallying cry of our studio, and our way of, flashing landscape architecture pride. And I love that. And it's just such a great word to say, Metasequoia glyptostroboides.
Yeah, that one just kind of just has that.
It's like a party
Yep.
and a plant name.
Yep. Speaking of part, you just kind of move your hips there a little bit. One that I like plants, so it's oftentimes a new plant, or not a new plant, but a newer plant to me, or one that I start to appreciate more becomes my more favorite one. And one recently has been the Bootaluya, right? Bootaluya, shake your booty. And so as I teach students, it's those little mnemonics or those actions that just can help you. Booty, Bootaluya. And then if you look at the plant and it sort of moves in the wind, it's like moving your booty in the wind kind of a thing. So it's fun. There's fun aspects to this. And I will also say, like, I had a student that I usually require a project in the class, and I've had students, I tell them to be creative, they create songs.
Yes.
And I've had students create songs using plant names. And I always had this grand ambition that someday I'm going to just break out in song with plant names, common and scientific names in class. I think just enjoy it. Embrace it. Have fun with it. Don't let the pronunciation keep you down. So, kind of off topic there. What was your second one, Leslie?
Well, it was related to yours. It's Bootaluya curtipendula,
Okay.
which always just kind of makes me want to just drop down and start dancing.
I took her thunder. Sorry about that.
That's okay, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it is just like Chad said, as much as you can sing it or rap it or dance it, if you can get your full body into learning your plant names, you're going to be more likely to remember it because your body will remember. Any others that you have?
I'd say one of my favorites, probably the liquid amber, Styraciflua. That certainly coincides with one of my newer favorite trees on campus and all around the area. But the liquid amber Styraciflua just kind of rolls off the tongue. And of course, as we go back to talking about how the plant names describe it, it describes it absolutely to a T what the plant does. And so liquid amber Styraciflua just kind of rolls right off. And so it just made it a lot easier for me to remember that.
So take-home message when it comes to learning plant Latin.
Take-home message: enjoy it. Don't let what seems to be a long word, a conundrum, sort of. Just enjoy it. Say it. Just dive right in, and make it fun. And honestly, we're not going to be here behind you correcting you every time you say it, sort of thing. I do it with students that are way off kilter, because you could potentially almost be saying something else and be starting to confuse others with what that. Because there are a few genera that are similar,
right.
not exactly, but similar. And if you start to pronounce them way off base, then you can start being confusing in what you're actually talking about. So that was a long-winded answer.
No.
TLDR, just have fun with it.
Just have fun.
Embrace it.
And welcome to the club.
Yes.
The Plantsman's Club is friendly and fun and forgiving.
Yep. We enjoy, as in any part of education, we enjoy seeing students embrace it and grow with it, right? So you'll be tossing around and using the scientific names a lot more as you're pulling plants and securing them and having that conversation. And it's a joy. The plant people love using that. So.
All right. Well, that's it.
Toga. I was going to get a little
I
vine
thought about
and put
getting something too.
I was going to say your Parthenocissus on. You could have easily wrapped that. I feel like I should have a recorder thing in my hand here.
If I had it together,
plant recorder. I might actually do that.
That would be a great idea.
I was actually just thinking about doing a plant walk as a plant explorer. Get the little specular monocle. Gosh, I can't even think this morning.
That'd be hilarious.
With a little hat. Dressed in khaki. Oh my gosh. Is that a Cercis canadensis? And I take off. Because it was already binding. There's some buttermilk. Yeah.
Really? Is there a J.C. Ralston costume? Would that be like recognizable for plant people? Like if you kind of Indiana Jonesed up yourself?
Some folks would probably get it. Tony Avon would get it.
Yeah.
And a few others would get it. Many others probably would.
You're like, don't you know?
Who is that?
The hottest plantsman ever.
Ever.
Dropping
Goes
down and
mine
dancing.
through the butt, right? All the way up. Well, that might be an outtake right there. I don't know.
Might be an outtake.
Yeah, that could be. And once you get to the club, we will give you one of these togas.
Yes.
And we will have a morning toga plant party.
That's not going to encourage them to learn plant Latin.
You never know. There's a
But-
couple. I had some on my feet everywhere. And I was going rid of my tomatoes.
Oh no.
But they never touched the tomatoes. They always did